Good evening. Caregiver Sathi is celebrating 3 years of being a formal entity. I have to say that although the idea has been rolling around in my head and my life for much longer, it is great to feel like a little child that is celebrating its third birthday anniversary. And we are all very excited at Caregiver Sathi. We have been doing a series of events to be able to take our message across to the various stakeholders and people that might know of caregivers. We have encountered the fact that caregivers do not necessarily identify as caregivers. And we live in a society where caregiving is fairly invisible and unrecognized and underappreciated and definitely underserved. In our series of events and having conversations around critical issues that impact family caregivers, I am delighted today to welcome a dear friend and, frankly, a force behind Caregiver Sati itself, a thought leader, and an HR professional, Soma Pandey. Welcome, Soma.
Thank you so much, Bhavna. I'm so excited to be here. I feel your enthusiasm and I feel so happy for you guys at the sheer resilience with which you have stuck on to this purpose. Like you said, it's an underserved arena and yet needs so much love and care and patience with which you guys are working. So, congratulations. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you, Soma. And here's a little trivia for the rest of the world. Soma, who is a dear friend, was once visiting me, and I told her that I've been playing around with this idea, etc. And in her inimitable style, she said to me, "तुम बस सोचती रहना करना मत." And I have to say that was definitely like a pivotal moment in my life for me to step back and say, "Oh my God, I really need to do something about this." And grateful for that nudge and push that we are here today. Thank you.
Well,
And thank you for the incredible support you have given us and our team over the period of time. And we are here today for a conversation around a topic that has taken momentum over the pandemic. We have seen a lot of literature around grief in general and specifically grief at the workplace. So I'd like to start off by your opening remarks around what is your perspective on grief.
Well, I have to say, grief was not something I had thought about or read about until the pandemic came and the whole issue of mental wellness was brought to the fore. And almost as if, when we grow up, it's suck it in, smile, carry on. That had been the philosophy. And therefore, there had never been any investment of time or energy to understand this concept. And I have to say, the handbook that you guys brought out last year, the Managing Grief at Workplace handbook, served as a trigger for me to start researching a little bit more about it. So I have to say that I'm very grateful for that push as well. So in terms of what do I feel now that I know a little bit more, I think it is very much alive and palpable in the workplace. There is no one among us who has not lost someone to the pandemic more recently or to death and illness in general. We've all gone through that, and yet at work we behave as if it doesn't matter. So, what I think about grief is first of all that we should all get educated about it. We should acknowledge it, and we should do something about it as much as we can in the workplace, and get comfortable with the fact that it'll happen. It'll happen to us. It'll happen to people around us. The grief that is, and get comfortable with having those sensitive conversations and doing something about it. Like I said.
Yeah. You know, the mere word grief, I remember the first time that I tried to have a conversation about it among the caregiver community. There was pin drop silence. There was no addressing the idea. And very often, grief is immediately associated with the idea of losing a person. However, grief could be many, many things. And would like to hear your point of view on that the word grief and its application across various things.
Yeah, very, very pertinent question. And again, a journey for me as well to have acknowledged the grief of so many different things. I think unless we understand grief, we get confused about why we are feeling a certain way, right? You didn't get the promotion that you wanted. That is also a kind of a grief that you feel, right? You didn't get the rating that you wanted at work, or you moved homes and you lost a part of your social circle, or a particular home or a room that you used to be in, you lose that. All these are changes that happen, and there is a part of us that misses it, and that's what grief is all about. And there are all kinds of griefs that you could go through. Not being able to do what you thought you wanted to do, losing a place, losing a loved one, of course. And then that's one type of grief of what we grieve for. And then, as I have learned in the past, it is such a complicated feeling that there are, how you grieve is also, there are so many things that could be happening in that arena, right? So there is a physical feeling of grief, there is emotional feeling of grief. It manifests itself in so many different ways in people. Some of us will grieve before the thing happens, so there's anticipatory grief. Some of us will be in the moment, so that's possibly the traumatic grief that happens in the moment. And sometimes it seems to have gone away and then comes back and hits us much later. So the complicated grief, as they are calling it in research. So yeah, it touches us in so many ways,
Yeah.
and it is so important to know that what you're feeling is possibly that you're feeling grief, and acknowledging that and being aware of that is so important, because it could manifest as insomnia, it could manifest as eating disorders, it could be just anxiety attacks, anything. I mean, or not wanting to socialize, or throwing yourself into different things for no reason. Anything that you don't explain, I think, can be traced back to some loss and therefore grief in some way. And therefore, it is so important for us to know about it a little bit more.
Yeah. Why bring it to the workplace at all? Like at least the time that you and I started working, there's a certain nature of what is professional and what's a workplace, and there are some things that have no place for that, right? So why talk about grief at the workplace?
Yeah. Um, I think things are changing. So let me start by saying that we've been talking about emotional intelligence for a long time. We've been talking about the fact that people with high EQ are likely to succeed in the workplace more than people with just IQ.
Hmm.
We've been talking about authentic leadership, where you bring your whole self to work and you allow yourself to be vulnerable in front of your people to create a safe space for them. So, to that extent, grief is a very authentic emotion, and therefore it has a space in the workplace. Now, that's my general answer to that question. But if you look at what has happened with the pandemic, and I was talking to
Hmm.
this friend of mine who is a homemaker, and she was, after 2 years of having her husband at home, working from home, and her kids doing school from home, she says, Soma, for 2 years, I have not been able to do my riyaz properly because I cannot sing in a full throated voice because these guys are working and I
Hmm.
want them out of the house. So,
Hmm.
if work can come into my home, especially now that we're working from home, where will my grief go? The boundaries are blurring, right? We are working from home, we are working for the home while working for our office and our professions. And the feeling, it's just me, right? I am the whole of me. If I'm bringing my passion for my work, and we all want passionate employees, right? We say that, whatever you do, do with purpose, do with passion. So passion is a type of emotion, and so is grief. So it's very much there. Unless we have emotion, we are not ourselves. We are not complete, and therefore, Just like any other emotion, there should be space for grief at workplace as well.
So beautifully articulated, right? We do want the most passionate employees that go after their goals without any rationale sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no real rationale for this, but let's just go for it because that'll give us the joy. But you bringing our whole selves could mean bringing the tougher parts of our life to the workplace, and this whole, like, literally the busting of the boundaries in the work and the home space has meant many many things, and many things have meant that we have not been able to understand and cope with grief. One does find that on an average most people need to even learn the social etiquette skills of what to say when someone else is grieving. What has been your experience around what would you do? What would you do?
Again, very good question. And it's a paradox. I feel that in India, we consider ourselves to be highly emotional people, right?
Mm,
We live with our hearts. We like melodrama. Our movies are like over the top emotional. And yet, I feel in social contexts, we maybe it's the fact that when you speak English, it comes out all wonky, but people tend to say the most horrendous things to each other, especially in sensitive times. And I remember a friend of mine, she was upset with me, and we were having an argument, and I said, just calm down. And she said, so what do you know? That's the worst thing you can say to a person when they're upset. You tell a person who's upset to calm down, is they will never calm down. And I had never thought of it. These are cliches. Oh,
mm,
it'll be fine. I'm
mm,
sorry you feel that way. Be calm, right? And these don't work. And I think all of us experienced this when COVID happened and death became so close to us, and the fear of death became so close. The panic about our loved ones who had comorbidities, all of us were in so much stress. I'm saying word and I'm knocking on wood. Let's hope that phase has passed and we are now in a milder version of the disease. But it brought it very to the forefront that somehow we don't know the social etiquette, like you said, of how to approach a person who is grieving. Um, and what I have found works best is to let them know that you're there, but absolutely respect boundaries of how they want to cope with it. And it's tough because in your own head you're being pulled in two different directions, right? You're really worried, so you want to be keeping an eye on them, because God knows what they will do because they're in this pain, and yet you know that you have to give them space, so you want to stay away and let them come to you. There is a need to solution for them and say, this is what you could do, have you thought of this? And yet, the right thing possibly is to just hold that space for them to be sad, to be whatever it is that they're going through. So being present, but letting them set the agenda to the largest extent possible, unless you see something really dysfunctional happening. And then asking for help yourself if you don't know what's happening. Seek out folks who can help you with mental wellness issues and maybe guide you, or direct the person who's going through it to go to that source of help. Um, yeah, those would be the things I would say. In a professional context, I would say that if you are the manager or the leader, then
mm,
allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and hence letting people share back what they might be going through is an important part. You can't and you shouldn't always come across as this amazingly strong person who can take anything, because while some may rely on you because of your strength, some may be put off by it to say, oh, how can I confess in front of this person who's always so strong? So
mm.
those would be my things: to be again genuine and open about your own grief, allowing space, holding boundaries, and try to not solution until you have to, and possibly asking for help from a professional who has better knowledge of these things.
So, two very interesting ideas. I mean, there's so much that you've said. One, definitely, this whole thing about leaders having lived through a period where they have learned to be strong, have all the answers, lead and direct. Now suddenly everybody telling them, please be vulnerable and show the sides that you don't know. It can be quite an ask for a leader, right? Like, I learned this way of being a leader, and now you're telling me be a different kind of leader. So yeah, I can feel like as if I'm failing in being a leader.
Yeah.
I don't be the, for the want of a better word, just the patriarch of my team, right? If I'm not all held together and put together. Um, Holding space, like you said, was the second part of this. Holding space is a skill. And I think, what would you say is holding space for another person, and how can one learn about holding space?
Oh my God. I don't know if I have a framework for that, and I think in frameworks. Let me see how I go about
Sure.
answering this, and you should also pitch in.
Yes.
Um, Holding space to me is about time and patience and empathy.
Mhm.
So, about creating some kind of an atmosphere in the team, and
Mhm.
this cannot happen overnight. You have to work at it, and if it doesn't happen as soon as you want it, have patience with it yourself, because
Yeah.
like you as a leader are changing, your team is also changing, um, seeing you become a different kind of a leader, right? So it'll take its time. People may have issues with trusting you in the first space,
Yeah.
and how you talk about it is important as well. So creating a safe space for a person to know that it's okay if they are going through something, that productivity is not the most important thing right now, and the team understands that.
Mhm.
Having a culture in the team which allows people to pitch in and pick up pieces if a person is not able to do their task, because it should be more a collaborative kind of a environment that you've built. And having check-ins and some kind of support built in to say, how would you like us to stay in touch with you? Do you want to, have a call every other day, or should we call you? Will you call us?
Mm.
Or if you have any employee assistance program, so you can have a helpline that you can share with them. So all of that, I think, put together to me would be holding space. Um, and it's not just the leader who will do it. They will have to create the environment across in the team to allow for that to happen. Not rushing a person through something like this, um, and acknowledging that grief exists, and also knowing actually what relationships are in your team, right? So one person may be grieving, and if you don't know that they have friends who may be again grieving with them but not very visibly, so then what's the dynamic happening? So being well connected and holding that role as well of knowing and being a confidant might also help. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fact that it's a practice, that it is trust building over a period of time, that it is not, it is certainly you, but it is many others, and that, you know, don't beat yourself up if you don't get it right. Just do it over a period of time. Sounds like something one can put a handle on. I do think that this whole thing around handling emotions. Earlier, it used to be right, like if you're feeling emotional, go to the HR team.
Yeah.
And now, if you're grieving, deal with it with the HR team, and they know what to do. But whatever I interact with, I wonder if where the HR team, HR professionals are with this,
Yeah.
right? So, what would be your observations, and what would be your advice to HR professionals?
So first of all, I feel every HR person has done a lot during the pandemic in any company which is a good company or a decent employer.
Yeah,
My God, these guys have really
yeah,
overstretched. I do think it's a stereotype, but I will say it anyway. But I do feel that in general, the empathy in HR folks is higher than other people. So the even the junior most person on your HR team will want to do a lot more.
Yeah,
um, and sometimes it is sad because they are not equipped for it.
that's right.
So we have never taught them
Mm.
to handle such emotion,
Yeah,
and then they bring their own personal immaturity sometimes, or maturity sometimes, on what advice to give, how to handle it, and all kinds of things have been happening all around. Some guys have done really well, some haven't done so well, but in general the HR team has been really stretched through the pandemic. Everything from where's my laptop to I lost my mother to can you get me blood plasma because somebody is hospitalized. Every time HR has been the first person to go to. The amount of stress that's put on the team has been extremely high. And like I said, they weren't equipped for it.
yeah,
And also, as HR, we go through our own turmoil, right? So, as business HR, we pride ourselves on doing the right thing for the company. So, keeping the productivity going, having fewer downtime, having less absenteeism, encouraging people to come back to work as soon as possible. So there's that pull of not letting things flag, and then there is this expectation as well of the human side of it, like after all you are the human of the side of the organization, so why can't you listen to me when I'm crying, and
yeah.
holding that. So HR has been really pulled in all directions, as have leaders. Anyone who had a team, they've gone through their own journeys of exasperation with themselves, with their own fears, their own problems, and then having to deal with the team who looks up at you and expects that you know something more than they do. So, yeah, it's been a tough time all around. And which is why I think the conversation today of how do you manage it at a workplace is very important. That at least now, as leaders, we need to put in place some training or enablement for not just leaders but also HR specifically to be able to be more effective in this area.
So, as someone who would be looking at their organization, or as someone who would be looking at their HR teams, what would be your approach to be able to pick up signs of grief and be able to find, healthy ways of dealing with it? How would you go about
Well, some are like, I mean, fairly obvious ones would be frequent holidays or not being able to return up to work, falling sick very often, or slacking in the work, or not contributing in teams. So anything when a person is behaving out of the ordinary, one should pick up on that and be very aware of these changes and reach out and figure out what might be happening with them. Obviously, it might, if you have the time, and set up some kind of process by which you know what to do if a situation like that happens. So if you want to have a bereavement policy, for example, if you want to have a backup built in on the team to say that, okay, for each person at least one person knows part of their job, so that the work also doesn't suffer, and we don't have to keep pressurizing that person to come back. They know that, okay, even if I'm not there, someone's taking care of that part of my role. So yeah, those might be the ways of dealing with it, and the ways to identify would be, as a good leader, pick up on any changes that you observe in the behavior of your team. It
it?
could be grief, and it could also be that they've interviewed with someone else and they're leaving. So you might as well pick up that signs as well, and be able to do something about retaining their employee.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think being watchful or vigilant of what is out of
Ordinary.
routine, out of ordinary, can
Yeah.
be a good sign. And certainly, sometimes the fact that HR teams are expected to be doing this job, but if they are exhausted and they are in their own, grief, which has impacted everyone, then it can be really hard on the system overall. Uh, what are some of the skills and support systems that HR professionals might need to build for themselves? The organization is leaning on them, but what could they do?
Yeah. So some of the things that come to mind is, of course, get educated about it. So
Mm,
webinars like this one, or there's enough literature out there to
mm,
educate yourself on the concept of grief, on what happens to the person going through it and also the person who's giving care at the time, right? Which could be
Yeah.
yourself in the case of an organization as an HR person. And learn to draw boundaries. It's
Mm.
easier said than done, but the fact is that you have to be a fully functional person if you are dealing with something like this. So learn what you can do and what you cannot do, and
Mm.
find out what the resources around you are whom you can call upon if you're feeling overstretched. um, of course, mindfulness, some kind of meditation, some kind of self awareness to pick up signs within your own body of what you're going through, within your own thought process of what might be happening to you. So, being very self aware of what's happening.
Mm.
And some amount of detachment. I think empathy or compassion, both of them are not about becoming weak with the
Mm.
emotion. It is about holding that emotion in a very real and authentic way, and
Yeah.
yet knowing that this is not my emotion, this is someone else's, and the only way I can help them is if I retain also my rationality and my ability to provide what they need versus just flowing with them and losing myself in it. So knowing that yes, the person who's suffering wants to see that you really feel it, that they want to see some expression on your face, the expression in your voice, otherwise they will not understand that you actually genuinely are in it with them. But also knowing that yes, I I I have not lost this person. This person has lost this person. I am caring about them, but it's not my loss. So drawing that boundary.
I totally love the idea of knowing, we do sometimes being protective and sometimes overprotective in our struggle with the pain and
Yeah.
the fact that our loved one or a colleague is going through pain. Boundaries can be hard to hold. What support systems can we create? So, you try your best and still it takes a toll on you. What about leaning in on others when you, even as a support system to employees, could be impacting you? What can HR folk do? Maybe be a part of forums, friends.
Yeah, yeah. So I would say internal as well as external circles can be created where you can share what you're going through, what you're struggling with, where you need ideas. That's definitely one of them. Having an on-call therapist whom you can call in for yourself or for the have that on for people available for the people who are going through your employees, and also starting to have these conversations with leaders around to
Mm.
educate everybody so that the load doesn't fall only on HR. And
Mm.
like I said, I think in an organization, especially if it's a larger organization, having some formal policies and processes that support caregiving while a person is grieving, right? So having, I don't know, maybe some community groups or having a particular time and place where you can ritualize the grieving process. Like many companies had these stress rooms, if you remember, where they would have padded walls and you could go and scream and shout and punch it out, something like that where it's okay to be sad. So that kind of space creation, either virtually or if you're back in office and physically. So co-opting the whole organization, educating the whole organization, creating a culture where you're not the only one holding this, because it's not possible. And if you're building a culture of empathy and compassion, then that's very important that each and every person in the organization feels that. And then knowing what's available in terms of support outside, cohorts, therapists, other organizations like yourselves, I guess. Those would be some things that you could do to prepare.
I think some great points there, because I have encountered some HR leaders who might worry that why do I need to bring in a therapist if I'm supposed to be the HR person in the organization, and then am I not being a good enough HR person? And so knowing the boundaries, I think what I hear you say is there is a role for an HR person and there is a significance of a therapist. Know where the HR role ends and that of a therapist
Yeah,
begins.
yeah.
There's an interesting question. You referred to something for policies for bereavement. What is the difference between grief and bereavement?
Oh my God. Yeah. Bereavement is when a death occurs, and then you allow people some time off, or you have other support systems available for them. But grief is more general than that. It's not just about losing a person. And bereavement policies, I think, are more common outside of India. I haven't seen many Indian companies take a. It's not like required for people to have it, so it's only very forward-thinking employers who put in place something like that. But I think it's good to have some time or resources set aside because death will happen. It could be your own employee, it could be in the employee's family. The sad part is when you make a policy, right? You have to define who is family. So then you've lost a cousin and you can't take that time off because but they are not family because it's only blood relatives or something like that that's been defined. So those angles come in and you have to see how empathetic you can be within the framework of how you operate as an organization. But yeah,
That's a great point because that points to understanding something called disenfranchised grief,
yeah,
which is about relationships that you might not be able to talk about. And I do think, for example, up until now, when people were not able to talk about their same sex partners or, things that they are not out in the open with, it could be hard to talk about those experiences as well. Um, I wanted to just share that from my experience. One of the organizations that I know very closely, I will not be able to name, but was interestingly had a bereavement policy. And over a period of time, in order to professionalize or become modern, chose to club it all into why do I need to get into the personal space of an employee? We will have just this one large chunk of leave. What you take leave for is not my concern. And now we are coming back to say, listen, can we have bereavement leave? Is a thing that I would think that HR people need to think about.
yeah, very true. And I think it's also about the trust that prevails in an organization. Like there are many organizations who will not have a leave policy at all.
Hmm.
You can take any amount of
Yeah.
leave that you want or need, and there is a trust that you will not misuse it. And similarly, just because there is no policy doesn't mean we will overwork you and not give you any time off, right?
Yeah.
So it has to work both ways. You're right. I think the thinking keeps evolving, and we go in a cycle sometimes of something seems important at one time and then not at another time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think it depends totally on the org culture how they want to deal with this.
During the second wave, and that's linked to a question that we have on the chat as well, which is that so bereavement for family is one thing, and we were running a support group for an organization, and this person just said, "I don't know how to deal with the fact that my manager is no more."
Oh God.
Like I just spoke with him, and within a short while this person was in, we did everything, we managed to get the hospital bed finally, but today we are where we are. That is bereavement and grief as well.
Oh, absolutely, it is. And even in a wider team, like I work in the IT services space, so teams are large. You have groups of 20 under different managers, but they're all working, say, for the same client. So there might be 200 people on a team, right? And if one of them was sick, even sick, right? It sends tremors throughout the entire 200 people. You identify with that person, and what happens or if the person was to sadly pass away, um, you are not just grieving for the loss of that person, but it is triggering so many other things. It is fear for your own life, memories of some past grief, um, or how you see the company treating their family and what gets done for them, and then the feelings you might have towards your employer, they may be positive or negative. There is so much that happens because even though death is something that will happen to all of us, we still, as human beings, are so afraid of it, and we don't know always how to deal with it. And that's okay. I mean, what I would say is that that's horrendous what you went through. But what you're doing of voicing it and acknowledging your pain, what you could do is talk to other team members and acknowledge their pain and create a space where you speak about that person or your experiences or what it is you're going through. Because speaking does help. I think bottling it up will never help. It will manifest itself in one way or another.
Mm.
So being conscious, aware, and talking it out might help.
Mm. So
And
there is this other question, right? So, for example, I'm like when I discover that a colleague, something has happened with a colleague or something, to a colleague, and I have my own stuff going on, and that's what's happened in the pandemic, right? Like I don't have the bandwidth to be able to offer the space or the empathy or the even silence, and that can have an implication for not just the relationship between these two people but the organization as a whole. So what are your
the first
insights?
thing is first thing is don't feel guilty. I think that's also a manifestation of grief where we
Mm,
are not able to do anything in the helplessness, and then we beat ourselves up for it and start feeling guilty about it.
mm,
Even a text is good enough. It's important that you reach out. I think that is something that you should do. Don't hesitate to reach out because
mm,
most people will appreciate that when they are grieving. I used
mm,
to be very diffident. I used to be so like, that person has lost someone.
yeah.
What are my words going to do? What can you possibly say? I used to not be able to reach out. I would, in my own head, get so frozen about what can you possibly say. But then I realized just saying that I'm there and I'm sorry is enough, or making that call is enough. You don't have to say anything. Once I called and I started crying, and I felt so like selfish about it. Like, why am I crying? It's their sorrow, and why am I doing? But it's okay. I mean, in the end, some kind of expression is all that needs to be done. You're only human. Be kind to yourself. That's very important. So don't hold it against yourself that you couldn't do more. Uh, and if it happens in an organizational context, I think if it's two mature people, they should talk it out. The leadership should facilitate that. Um, that's why picking up these cues is important, Bhavna, right? As a leader, you should know, or you should be able to pick up, like, these two guys used to be good friends, now they're not talking to each other, or how come this project is not going well
Yeah.
because there is something
Yeah.
underhanded happening there. So but it takes courage as a leader to confront these sensitive issues as well. So we'll have to work with that and learn our way through it. And again, don't be harsh on yourself if you don't do it the first time, right? The
Yeah.
worst thing you can do as a leader is to delegate this responsibility.
That's a great point.
Where you chicken out, and it happens to us in HR, doesn't it? Like, yeah, they have to fire someone, then put the gun on our shoulders. They want to find out how a person is saying, doing, then they'll say, hey, can you check in on that person? Do it yourself. I think that's
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is merit in somebody else checking in, and that might be something else, and there is merit in you yourself doing what you're doing. And there are a couple of questions around, like silence. Like sometimes I'm just, what do I do? I'm reaching out to the person is silent, or I don't have anything meaningful to say. So is that okay? I mean, I.
Yeah, I mean, ask yourself, would it be okay, God forbid, if you were going through something like that? Would that be okay with you if someone just reached out and didn't have know what to say? I
Mm,
think you'd get it. I mean, people are not looking for solutions. They're not looking for poetry or any
mm,
deep condolence messages or anything. They're just looking for your presence, that you're there.
yes.
So letting them know that I'm here, not giving advice like it'll be okay, you'll get over it, time is a great healer. These cliches are not required. Just saying that
Mm,
I'm here whenever you're ready.
mm,
I'll check in again tomorrow. Uh, if you
mm.
don't want me to call you, let me know. Something like that,
Yeah.
Just saying that I'm here and I'm persistently here. I'm not going to give up on you.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me of one instance when I had, and there was this friend of mine who would simply every morning send me a message saying, "How are you today? Remember, you are loved."
That's so beautiful.
Every day without fail for, I don't know, 30 days. And I think we need to share some of these things so that, we can try newer and different things. One of the things that upsets me significantly, I try to understand where people may be coming from, but it upsets me still, is, the RIP messages on WhatsApp and uh, various posts. Um, what do you think about that? Like, it sometimes some other person's expression of grief can trigger anger or disappointment in you as well. So, but in an organization or in a pool of people, there can be all kinds of expressions, and there can be all kinds of ways of dealing with things. What is your take on that? Like a bunch of people feeling angry or feeling disappointed about grieving.
I've never thought about that. One expects that everybody will act like an adult and just get on with
Mm,
it. You're right. We are all such complex people, and there is so much
yeah.
in our frames that we are coming at something from. That when you're standing behind this window, what's happening in my world, and as I experience the same thing that you might be experiencing, and how I react is going to be so different. Um, and that's why possibly a culture of trust, a culture of communication is important, with less judgment and more conversation to say, okay, so how do we deal with this and how do we move forward is important. um, yeah, I mean Lata Mangeshkar's death, right? And some such angry messages going on about how she wasn't the best person. So you see that happening, that
Mm,
people react very differently to things happening.
mm.
Sometimes we are projecting, sometimes we have our own baggage. um, yeah.
I'm sorry, I took you by surprise with that question, but I'm keen to remind you that in one instance when there was a difference of opinion, I experienced you coming back and saying, "Okay, maybe what I have said has not landed well with you, but can we speak about it rather you judge me for it?" So I have learned that from you, playing it back right now, which is that I took a position. Maybe it wasn't great for you, like, in an exchange, but can we be adult about it? Like you said, can we talk about it and have a difference of opinion? So,
Yeah, goes back to what your belief about people is
yeah.
also, right? And I find that in our personal lives we are way more trusting than we are at workplaces.
Hmm.
Somehow at workplaces we are largely suspicious, careful, possibly insecure, uh,
Competitive.
competitive, right? And therefore, we start doubting intentions. And
Yes.
there is no reason to be that way. And,
Yes.
this golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you.
Yes.
It's the same thing. Like, when I said something, was my intention bad? 99% of the time, it is not bad or malicious or selfish or rude. But my words may come across like that, and especially in chat forums. Oh my God, the text, when you read it out of context, sometimes I read back my own messages. I'm like, my God, that could have sounded so bad to someone. Right?
That's
Because
right.
brevity is there, there is no emotion that goes through, you're not seeing the body language. So start with the assumption that the intention is not bad,
Hmm.
and maybe there is a merit in figuring out why something was said, and going with it. So, sometimes you could be wrong there. Maybe people who are doing it out of a malicious intent and a devious agenda that they might have, but My belief really is that 99.9% of human beings are pretty decent. They come into office to do a decent day's work. They want to progress, but probably on the merits of their work and their caliber. So have that um, confidence and then approach it with that. That just like I don't do nasty things, chances are this person didn't want to do a nasty thing. So let's talk.
We have an interesting question, Soma. People are touched mostly with the simplest of things. Could Soma ma'am share an example of an experience of an act of compassion in managing grief?
Sometimes it's not even an act of compassion that one did. But for example, we had deaths in the office of employees whom one didn't know because it's a large employee base, and it's HR's job to inform everybody. So there's a mail that goes around and says this has happened, so and so employee, and we are taking care of things. Don't worry about it. That's the kind of mail that leadership we get. It that, yeah, it's happened. What I would do is just call that HR person instead of saying, "Oh, I'm very sorry." I would call and say, "Are you doing okay? Must be stressful on you." That itself, I was told later that the people really appreciated that we are all very busy. But this is a significant event, and that the fact that you took time to say that you know that I'm going through something, that's enough. I know you can't do much more. I mean, it's my emotions and it's my job, and I'm doing it. But so I think those things. Of course, in terms of organizational response, also I have seen some amazing work being done by most companies, right, coming together and not worrying about what um, was the entitlement of the family when something like this happened in like an employee passed, but doing more than they were supposed to required to do. Funding education for the children, giving a job to the spouse, or training the spouse for something that they could do outside, cash. All that kind of thing has happened from a compassion perspective as well. But yeah, I think the human touch has been what I have seen that really people appreciate a lot.
Yeah. No, absolutely. When someone told me that just the fact that you left a little post-it note
Yeah,
saying "I came by" was was okay, was great.
yeah,
I think human touch is the point. And I'm going to take another question that is here. Very often, employees do not, may not want to bring their personal circumstances, their home circumstances, to the workplace. So there could be long drawn illness, there could be a family member who has mental illness, or there could be something like, stuff that happens in every home, right? Aging, pay, etc. But the employee doesn't know and that they are going through anticipatory grief. What can you do?
yeah. Two things I think engagement, sorry, education is very
Hmm.
important. That talk about it, not like you may be going through this, but more in a general sense that uh, a webinar on grief or a training program for 1 hour just tells you what it is, how you might be experiencing it, why it may happen, that kind of stuff, which it becomes a topic that people know about. That's all we can do, Bhavna. We can make the unknown known, right?
Hmm.
And make it less scary by spreading education about it. That yes, you're going through this really strong emotion. Most people will go through it. It's valid. It's okay. And then letting them set the boundary again, but having a space somewhere to say that in this company it's okay to talk about that, but
Hmm.
you're not forced to do it. Just like I remember when we had only recently started working really aggressively on making workspaces safe for LGBTQ communities, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So we would have sessions about sensitization, education,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then some people would feel like now they have to go probe into people's personal lives and ask them, "Hey, are you gay?" So you have to tell them that no, that's not the point. I'm not telling you this so that you start now doing investigation and forcing people to come out because now you are enlightened. That's not the point. It's education so that you know. And same thing with grief. So if you don't want to talk about it, or your team doesn't want to talk about it, I'm not going to force it out of their mouths to say, no, tell me what's going on in your house. That's absolutely their personal decision on how much and what to share. But yes, there is a space that, yes, these conversations happen and it's okay. And be aware that this is how grief feels like or looks like, so that you can identify it.
Yeah, I know. I can just, visualize right now some of the people that I may have worked with in the past were saying, like, my God, like, it has become so complicated. It was a lot simpler when,
Yeah.
you could say, this is your personal stuff, just keep it at home. And now, like, it's become a lot more complex. And, well, we are living in complex times. So,
And I'm
uh,
sure for many people, it's also liberating that you don't have to have these artificial boundaries.
mm,
And we've joked about it since Kingdom Come, right? The day your boss is having a bad time, you would say,
yeah.
बीवी से लड़के आया है. And it's a gendered thing because when we started working, then bosses were usually male. It's only very late in life that I got a female boss. So yeah, so we've been bringing emotion into the workplace. We know it's there. We know personal things do trickle in. Now it's out in the open. I think it's nicer. It's more for relief to say, yeah, it happens, and it happens in every family, and we
Mm,
are mature enough to deal with it. Of course, there are professional requirements which should not be compromised to the extent possible, and it doesn't mean you're vitiating the professional atmosphere of a company. But not acknowledging emotions or grief or anything is just artificial. It's not going to work in the long run.
yeah. Yeah. I, I think that that's great. There is a question about how can organizations support an employee's family who is grieving. Thank you for that question. We did speak about it a little while ago. So there are a bunch of things that can be done from the financial, emotional, psychosocial support. But I think just simply reaching out to that person and letting that person tell you in the time that they take, because sometimes the initial period can be overwhelming and you might even not know that you have to do things. Sometimes you have to wait a period of time before you can support. So I do think that there is a bunch of support that can be given. um, I think I would, this is a conversation that is something that we can go on and on about, but I do think that it is important that leaders, organizations, and especially HR professionals are able to equip themselves with. Uh, you did mention that you refer to the handbook for grief at the workplace. Tell us how you found it useful and how do you think we can make it a little better?
Oh, it's very useful because it's a layman's guide to grief. I would say layperson's guide to grief. It has everything you would want to know about um, this emotion. And also, it has fairly pragmatic advice on what to do about it in
Hmm.
a workplace. Like what kind of policies can be put in place, what kind of training can be put in place. So I think it's a fairly comprehensive one. What we need to do better is get it out there a lot more. I think, in
Hmm.
terms of content, I think you have everything that one would want to see. So it
Hmm.
has the various types of grief. What can you grieve for? It has what happens with you and your body when you're grieving. Then it has stories of people who have undergone you know sad situations. How is it a grievous? No, not grievous. Is there a word that comes with grief?
Uh,
Grieving situations. I don't know.
Grieving,
Yeah.
aggrieved.
Uh, so I think fairly comprehensive. That's why I liked it, and it's not something I had seen before. So for me, it was extremely helpful during the pandemic to refer to it and share it with my team to read about it so that they were better informed. And yeah, just making it a topic that can be talked about, right? So that's the good part, that it brings it to the fore to say, yes, there's a topic and you can talk about it. Here's some literature, read it, and you'll feel more enabled and empowered.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because that was really the intention for that handbook, to be able to reach out, to be able to create a vocabulary so that people could refer to it, talk about it, maybe trigger some more, read some references. I'm delighted to hear that. I would also like to take this opportunity to let people know that we will be announcing workshops in which we would like to be able to take people through not just the handbook, but also some of the practices that one can deploy. So we are looking at announcing a version 2 of the handbook, which will have many more best practices, checklists, and a little bit of a workbookish format in which you can, equip yourself and maybe, go through a programmatic approach in which you can embed this exercise in the organization.
Very nice. All the best with that.
Yes, I will definitely be sharing that. Once you give your closing remarks, I will then speak about what we are doing as a part of our anniversary. Would like to hear your closing remarks as we bring this webinar to an end.
Thank you, Bhavna. Good conversation, and I hope useful conversation. This is
Yes.
a very important topic to discuss, to be aware of. Um, I think message to the HR teams that you are not necessarily mental wellness professionals, so uh, know where your boundaries are. Ask for help. To leaders, I would like to say that create space for educating yourself about this emotion. Create space for allowing conversations about grief and other connected emotions that come out amongst people. Make it a safe place for people to bring their whole selves to work. And Yeah, I wish everybody really, really well. Stay safe and be happy.
Thank you for saying that, Soma. I'd like to say that yes, grief can be painful and grief can be difficult. It can feel like a dark tunnel, but there is hope and growth at the other side of grief. Um, Doing a webinar on a digital medium specifically about workplaces feels like addressing a very privileged audience. I would like to make a request. We are a Section 8 company and we are run on philanthropic contributions. So we would like for you to think about contributing, because there is a whole world of outreach and work that we do around grief and bereavement for families that do not have access to digital media, or that do not have workplaces, or that do not know how to express themselves in English, a language that we conducted this webinar in. One of our ways to be able to cope with grief is to be able to think about the world beyond ourselves. So, with that request, thank you very much for all of you who have joined, and all of you who may watch this later asynchronously. Reach out to us if you need any support. We will be more than happy. And immense gratitude for you, Soma. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you and happy birthday once again.
Thank you. Thank you.